welcome to my YouTube channel where we discuss, critique, and analyze. My name is Ainsley, and in today's video I'm going to be attempting to answer the question, what makes a good book-to-screen adaptation? Now, I do believe there are many things that go into it, and things can differ from project to project, but I do feel like we can come to a conclusion and find what do different adaptations, popular adaptations, well-loved adaptations tend to have in common. Now, we also need to take into account that certain adaptations, such as Jaws or Jurassic Park, are very much loved on their own, and many people who may have watched either of these today are not as familiar or may not have read or even known that they were actually adapted from a book, and they certainly aren't the only ones. I have read Jurassic Park, the book, and I'm a fan of that, as well as being a big fan of Jurassic Park, the movie. I love dinosaurs, so I'm going to love either of them no matter what, but I think it's important to talk about what really makes a good adaptation, what makes an audience, especially the audience who are fans of the source material, really like the movie, and if someone originally liked the movie, what makes them read the book and adore it and not have it in any way taint their love for the movie. First, I want to discuss certain components that I think makes a good adaptation. And then I'm going to make some points about what makes a bad adaptation. We'll talk a little bit about mediocrity in there as well, and we'll talk about some popular adaptations versus some well-hated adaptations. And a lot of the ones I'm going to talk about as I get further into this, as I make certain examples, are going to be ones where I've personally read the book and watched the movie. And so, because I don't want to just talk and not have it mean anything, but I also want to show some examples of where other people can get a leg in and see kind of their own thoughts, or other people's thoughts that I've come through just by seeing it on, the web, the World Wide Web, the internet. What makes a good adaptation? First, I think you need to be authentic, and things need to come organically together. And you can't really force anything in this. And I think a good example for me when it comes to something that's very authentic and organic is Agatha Christie's Poirot. This was a series that was on ITV in the UK, and it was here on PBS in the US. I also know it's available to watch on BritBox, or at least the majority of it is available on BritBox, which is a streaming platform in the US. I believe it's in a few other places as well. But what makes Agatha Christie's Poirot so good, in my opinion, is it's not necessarily that David Suchet was pretty much born for the role, and that he in many ways resembles Poirot, but that his transformation into Poirot is so organic. And when you watch an interview with him where he's going into it and he does the voice of Poirot first, he gets his voice, you've got that Belgian accent, and then that takes him and goes all over him. And it doesn't seem that the characterization and what David Suchet had done wasn't something that was rushed. It was something that he took the time to, and he luckily allotted the time to really become Poirot and to separate David Suchet and Poirot. And you have that along with makeup and hair and clothes, all of that, the costuming department, coming together to help just tie those loose ends and truly bring this character to life. Obviously, the many books and short stories in which Poirot is the main character, he is pretty much what people come for. Of course, when it comes to liking a specific book, it isn't always about Poirot. It can be about the mystery wasn't very good, or it wasn't really well written, well executed, or I feel like we were more force fed in feeling that Poirot is this super smart person. That's something I've heard a lot with after the funeral. And when it comes down to these books, though, it really is about Hercule Poirot, so it's important to adapt this and have Hercule Poirot as your focal point. And so you want to get that right. And on the other end of it, there is the Agatha Christie Marple series that 100% I loved both of the actresses that played her. I think they were a little different from the book, but they were very much like your cute little like nymph grandmothers. Like you have like a small little grandmother who's like the cutest. That's how they were, especially Geraldine McEwen. But the overall mysteries, the way they adapted them and trying to adapt them for a modern audience, though they are set in the 50s, just didn't work in that instance, where it tended to work a lot better in Agatha Christie's Poirot. Now, there's a few reasons for this, but I think the big problem overall is that I don't even know, it's like they tried to whip things together. And of course, in the Poirot series, they had a lot more to work with. And there's adaptations within Marple that they're taken from other mysteries that did not include her, and they're putting her in it. And these stories did not feel as authentic and organically put together as the Poirot series did. So that's one of the reasons why I find authenticity and organic and bringing these together in an organic nature really important to making a really good adaptation. The second point I'm going to make here is the importance of execution. When you read the book and you go into adapting it, probably beginning just going through the book and taking notes, trying to figure out what's going to work on screen and what isn't, and what you can leave out and it's not going to affect the story in any way. And after that, you write the script, you edit it, you rewrite it, you do a bunch of drafts, and then it all comes down to the execution. Execution in each part. The writing of it, then bringing it to set, and you're casting it, and you are directing it, and you have all of these things going on. Now, in discussing Percy Jackson, I have never read those books, but based on what people have said, some of the casting that was done in the original movies that were adapted, the casting of it was very whitewashed and quite racist in what they did. And that is a horrible execution of doing that. It's important to know that if a character is black, a character needs to be black. It's important when a character is integral to the story that he is also integral to the story that exists within the film. And from everything that I've heard about Percy Jackson, in the original adaptation that is not done, and there is going to be a series, I believe, coming out, and we'll see if they've done that. And I do believe that something like Percy Jackson, definitely it works more in their favor to do that in a television series. I don't think that's necessarily always necessary, but in this case it may well be. But it seems like one of the biggest problems was that their execution was horrible, and that they cared more about maybe just, I don't know, they didn't care enough. There has to be some joy in this project that is not just people trying to make money, and it's not a producer's film. And when you put a lot of joy and love into something, it tends to be, again, a lot more authentic and organic, and the execution tends to be a lot better. Step 3 is taking what you need to take and leaving out what you don't. Now, this can be very different depending on the book or the book series. I recently read Misery, which is what the film Misery is adapted from. It is a Stephen King book, and they are very similar, the book and then the film, but there was some things that were left out. The book is more gory and even more excruciatingly horrific than the film is, even though the film certainly has its moments. And there were some things that were added in the film, and you know why. As an audience member, you know why. It's because when you are reading the book, you are inside Paul's head. And you can't necessarily be in Paul's head. You are an observer. You are in a voyeuristic standpoint when you're watching the movie. So there is going to be some changes that the writer and anyone else involved had to adapt in order to make the adaptation faithful to the book while allowing it to be a movie that works. And this can also be in the case of Gerald's Game. This was a book that was considered unfilmable, and then you had Mike Hannigan, who ended up being able to write a great script and adapt the movie into something that is quite watchable and also pretty terrifying. Other great adaptations of his, though I haven't read all the books, I would say is the original Pet Sematary, and that might just be from nostalgic points of view. And Carrie, I really like that. And I like the original miniseries and the movies as well. Now, those I can't judge from a reader's point of view because I have not read those books yet, but if you have, I would like to know your opinion in the comments below, and we could have a little conversation about why this is a good adaptation or why it is not. Now, when it comes to Stephen King adaptations, it seems like certain adaptations, such as Misery and Gerald's Game and the It film, are ones that Stephen King really likes. I know Mike Hannigan also did Dr. Sleep, which is a film I absolutely love, and he tended to right some of the wrongs that Stephen King and fans of Stephen King did not like from the original film, The Shining. And The Shining is a much-loved film, especially for horror fans. I'm not a big The Shining fan, if I can be completely honest with you. It's just an unpopular opinion of mine, and a lot of it has to do with the changes they made. I don't think the changes were needed, and to be honest, I feel like it really messed with the story. And as an audience member, you may disagree and find that the adaptation wasn't good, and I think that The Shining is a good film in a lot of ways. I don't really like it, but it's not a good adaptation from the source material, and you can be a good film and a horrible adaptation at the same time. Number 4, choosing your medium. Now, I'm talking primarily about choosing film or TV, or are you going to make it into a film or a miniseries or a television series? And of course, nowadays we don't really do radio, though there is some radio still being done in the UK, and that is how a lot of adaptations of Agatha Christie's work began, and some other mysteries and the like. And nowadays we tend to choose either between our television or the many streaming services that we watch from, or making it into a movie. I tend to find that movies or a series of movies works really good when you are doing something like Jurassic Park. The book Jurassic Park is quite different than what the movie ended up being. The movie is a blockbuster, and it is a lot more of a family film than the book would be one you'd want to read to your children. And there's a couple other things that are in there. It's a lot gorier, more horrific, quite gruesome, where the book might have these elements, but it's certainly more family friendly. When you make decisions about how you want to adapt it, it's really how much you need to put into your script, or what you can take from this book and have it into the 100 and so pages that you need to make a really good and concise script. If you cannot make a concise script, it's maybe important to turn it into a series, at least a mini-series. There has been several series, such as The Haunting of Hill House, The Haunting of Bly Manor, in which Mike Hannigan used the story of Shirley Jackson's in the first ones, and then Henry James's stories and short stories within The Haunting of Bly Manor. These are quite different than the works that they are, but he did use the atmosphere and made many references to their work, and these series were loved by many people. Now, that's kind of different than a lot of the other adaptations that we are discussing, but what he did was essentially bring more life to these stories and give a more modern take on them as well. He also utilized specific themes to bring to these stories, and we, as either Shirley Jackson and Henry James fans, or someone who's never heard of them before, really ate it up. But then you have series like Game of Thrones, where you have this big epic story that you want to tell. It's very fantastical, it's a fantasy series, there's dragons, and you need to make it into something a lot more than a 3-episode, 6-episode series or a 1-season series. You needed to go over a few. The problem, however, here is when you reach the mark where there's no more story to tell, and the director, creators, writers decide to go forth with it, and they really don't know what to do, and they end up ruining the story. That's what happened in the last season of Game of Thrones, and they really should have stopped before, in my opinion. Other series that we have that are adapted from a book would be Killing Eve. Now, we're going to pretend that the last season of Killing Eve doesn't exist, and just discuss 1, 2, 3. These were adapted from some books that I hear isn't very good. So this is an example of someone taking the source material, taking the characters, and breathing a lot more life into it. It also comes from the female perspective and the female gaze, as opposed to the male gaze. Sometimes you have source material that doesn't have a lot to give, so you have to give more to it. And sometimes you have a book or a book series that gives you a lot, and you have to take something from it. There are certain changes that we may wonder why they were made. For example, the changes that come from the Outlander book series and the changes that were done to the ring. These may just be artistic license, and some things maybe work better for what they want to do. I haven't watched the entire television series. I was more interested in what was happening in Scotland, and I haven't read the entire book series because, well, it's a lot. But I do have to say that some of the changes that were made had a lot to do with the chemistry between the actors, so you got somebody who was a bit thinner than what is described in the book, and that's not to say anything against Katrina Balfe. Or Katrina Balfe, I believe is how you say her name. She is so talented, so beautiful, stunning, amazing, the best. She's that character, and at the end of the day, some changes are made, and sometimes they work, and sometimes they don't. Number 5, the originality. This can be kind of hard when you are doing an adaptation, as you are adapting it from a book that already exists. But when you have certain books, i.e. Wuthering Heights, Jane Eyre, Shakespeare, anything that has been adapted multiple times, you need to bring something else to it. And I can say that it is definitely done well sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't work out. And maybe it's just the execution that didn't go, but it's much better to at least try some originality than just stick to the guns of what you've been given on the initial script or what exists in the books. I'm a big fan of Wuthering Heights. It's one of my favorite books, but it's been adapted so many times. So in my opinion, if we were to adapt it again, we probably needed to take it from where it's at and modernize it a little bit. give it something fresher to go on. There was one that was made in 2011 in which the character of Heathcliff was a black kid. Now, of course, I don't believe that he was actually black in the book. I also don't believe that he was white in the book either. But I believe this was a really good change because it also made sense. It wasn't adding diversity for the sake of adding diversity. Where Heathcliff was found was Liverpool, where the slave trade was occurring. So Heathcliff could have very well been black. He also very well could have been a Romani, or he also could have been from India. There's many different points in the book where he is said to basically not be white, and there are many things they talk about that is just simply racist. When it comes to adapting classics or adapting any type of book that has been done many times, it's time to change it up a bit. But I also think we need to start adapting things that haven't been adapted before. Studios are so invested in making money and throwing money into things where they know they're going to make it out or make it back, or attempt to make it back at least, but it doesn't always work. We don't need to continue remaking things or readapting things. Sometimes we need to go to a bottom shelf in a library to find something that the audience may attach to again. We need to get back into this new, fresh vibe and where we're taking these books and adapting them. 6. We need to be honest, and we need to adapt the characters as they are in the books. This is another part of number 1, being authentic, but being real and true to the book and its entirety is really important. Red, White, and Royal Blue is currently being adapted, or it will be soon, by Casey McQuiston. One of the characters in this book and his family are Mexican, or he is at least half Mexican, but it is very apparent that he is not white passing. This is important in casting the character. It's important to get people that look like they are and to not change the races. This is something that was also a big problem in Percy Jackson, as I had mentioned before. So when you're adapting, the casting has pretty much got to be spot on. Now, they might look a little bit different than they did in the book, i.e. Katrina Balfe, and you may have some even bigger differences, such as maybe a character was white in a book and he was changed to black, Hispanic, Asian. That's okay, but whitewashing is never okay. In conclusion, I believe that in order to make a good adaptation, you have to be authentic. You have to have an organic view of things. This includes the way that you read the book and take the book and turn it into a script, and then have the actors act the script out and what the director does. There is so much that goes into it, and every person is important in creating a good adaptation. That's probably where things like Percy Jackson really fell off, and how later seasons of Game of Thrones were absolute trash, because they weren't being authentic to the source material. They weren't being honest, and they simply just didn't care. If the main goal is to make money, you're not being, again, authentic, honest. You're not being real. A good adaptation is good, but more importantly, a good adaptation connects with its audience in the way the book did, or at least it puts in enough effort to connect with the audience in a different way. A book and a film are two entirely different things. A book and a television series, again, two completely different things. But one of the most important components in putting together a adaptation is to try to put in that effort. So please, if you are watching this and you are making an adaptation, don't fuck it up. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to watch or listen to this video. If you have anything else you would like to add, please comment below. Check out all my social medias in the description box below. I will put a little pinup of anything of like really great adaptations that I personally love, and maybe you can comment below with some of your favorite and least favorite adaptations. Like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe and ring that bell to be notified every single time I post, and go into the description box below to check out all of my social media and my website, ainsleypeace.com. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you next time.